So I like to call this build Face Tanking 101. It's a very unique take on basically just avoiding the use of your spacebar and some really interesting things like throwing in Restriction Cord and Shielded Heart to make up for it. I know melee builds are really strong, so I wanted to make something very unique, which is why I picked two archetypes which are a little bit strange to see paired together, being Alchemist and Challenger. And I picked a unique weapon, the Red Doe Staff, to use, as I've seen nobody really make any videos on this. So it was a lot of fun to put together, and I'll go through some of my choices. And if you like this kind of thing and you want to see more, please don't forget to like and subscribe. So for my weapons, mods, and mutators, let's just start with Nebula. Just used it because, want to corrode the boss, get a little bit of extra bleed damage, and proc Abrasive Whetstone, just the goated damage amulet, really. And then the main weapon, the Red Doe Staff. This is a really curious choice. It has a built-in mod called Lifeline, and after doing a bunch of damage, the next charge attack will create this stampeding doe, which does even more damage, and it can proc on the attack that it goes off on, which is to say that your first attack you don't have the Spirit of the Red Doe, but every other attack you'll have this stampeding doe that does a bunch more damage, and you'll see you can actually run the numbers up pretty quickly here. And for our mutator, we picked Vengeful Strike, which is a huge change up compared to the type of mutators I've been picking before, and that's because for whatever reason the Red Doe Staff doesn't work with say mutators like Overdrive. It doesn't proc the stacking melee crit hits for whatever reason. Same thing with Shield Breaker, same thing with Striker. These melee hits don't count to create these stacks. However, their secondary level 10 effects will work, so I could pick, for example, Overdrive, but I would only get the level 10 perk from this, so it's not really worth to only get 20% additional damage on crit strikes. So I decided to put on Restriction Cord, so I would be guaranteed to get my melee or my health below 50% and get my melee damage up by 50 and my melee crit chance by 15. Our archetypes are also rather different this time. I chose to put Alchemist and Challenger. Challenger, you might expect, being such a great close combat archetype, melee archetype, with its Juggernaut skill just to get a bunch of extra melee damage, as well as really good tanking ability and a bit of extra melee speed. And I picked Alchemist to change it up and pick something a little bit different. Maybe I could have picked a different archetype and gotten a little more damage, but Alchemist is really nice because of the 3 additional concoctions you can have active, and then you can make all your concoctions towards getting you to be tanky, which is the whole point of this. You just want to be face tanking. The only offensive skill Alchemist has is Frenzy Dust, which is a great one actually to increase our melee speed as well as our movement speed, and you'll see the charge attacks on the Red Doe Staff go off so quickly. It's so nice. Then I'll just go over the concoctions we picked because of our Alchemist choice in our prime slot. So I picked Mudtooth Tonic to give more health, which will also stack with our shield, so our shield will be even bigger. I picked Mudtooth Stew for the extra stamina, but actually looking back, I didn't need this, and I could have picked an additional concoction to make me tankier. I picked Dark Cider to give more health, more stamina, more movement speed. Once again, we only really care here about the health and movement speed. Stamina is not a big deal. And Grey Health Conversion, just because we're going to get hit. Let's be real, I'm not going to hit my spacebar at all, I'm not dodging anything, I'm just going to accept most attacks that come my way. And then I say stamina doesn't matter, because before the fight we're going to pop Gull Serum, which reduces stamina consumption by 50% for 2 minutes. Well, it's normally 1 minute, but our Alchemist trait buffs consumable durations. Now for our amulet and rings, picked Abrasive Whetstone just because it's really the greatest amulet that you can slot for most builds. And then it pairs with the Twisting Wounds I put on Nebula to get the bleeding and then to get the extra crit chance and crit damage. Berserker's Crest is basically a mandatory ring for stamina cost, as well as speeding up the melee charge speed. Then the next ring is Restriction Cord. This is actually kind of necessary just because I picked Vengeful Strike. I tinkered a lot with the rings, the amulet, and the mod to see what would give me the most damage, and in practice this is the only build I found that would let me one phase Kaeula's Shadow. Everything else would become really close, but would never quite push me over the edge. Next is Burden of the Gambler. Just a crit chance, crit damage ring, disables weak spots, we don't care, it's a boss that doesn't have a weak spot and we're meleeing. And Probability Cord for even more crit damage. Akari's Warband would technically give us more damage, but once again, this is a face tank build. We're just gonna eat everything that she throws at us. So now you might look at my armor and go, why would you pick Leto Mark 1 instead of Leto Mark 2, which gives you more armor and hence more tankiness at the cost of less weight? But I don't really care. I just like the aesthetic here of Leto Mark 1, and it works just fine. They're both so tanky, and there's hardly a difference between DR. So I picked the Shielded Heart to get the shield for 100% of our max health, which is phenomenal because Restriction Band limits our actual health to 50%, but our shield scales off of our max health, which is why everything else that I have was boosting our max health. So basically this just makes us extra tanky and kind of minimizes the downside of Restriction Cord. Restriction Cord being a really curious choice on a build where I'm not going to be dodging. But then for our fragments, melee crit chance, melee crit damage, these two are absolutely necessary for high damage. And then I found that melee damage was actually performing better than melee speed. Same thing on my previous melee build. For whatever reason, melee speed is not doing as much as I think it should be, and melee damage is just outstripping it in terms of damage output, at least for this weapon. Now for our traits. So we get Potency with Alchemist, we get Strong Back with Challenger, and then Vigor and Fortify are for tankiness. Swiftness is because we just want to be moving quicker. Endurance for stamina, which I found actually wasn't the biggest issue, but we do need some buffs to stamina. Spirit and Expertise, we don't actually put points in, they just come with the archetypes. Bloodstream for the great health regen. Because we're going to be getting hit, we're going to have gray health, so this just tops us off a little bit more. Siphoner, the lifesteal is great to give us our health back when we get hit. And then I had recovery for stamina regen. This didn't actually pan out to be the most important thing, so you could distribute these elsewhere. I'm just going to do a fight breakdown, explain the things that I do to make it work, as well as some interesting things that I found out while practicing and trying to get this kill down to be as quick as reasonably feasible. So we're just going to go through a short buffing sequence of Gull Serum for that lasts 2 minutes, reducing our stamina consumption by a half. Our Shielded Heart, which will last 20 seconds or until the shield runs out. The shield is going to run out far before 20 seconds. And then our Challenger skill, which will last 25 seconds. An interesting thing to note is whenever you use a relic with Alchemist, there's a perk that will give you a random buff for 60 seconds. There's like 6 different perks it can give. The one that we got, you can see here, it's at the bottom. It's kind of hidden behind this, I apologize. I don't really know a better way to show these, but it's this yellow thing for 59 seconds, and that will increase our crit chance by 5%. There's 5 others that you can get, but this is the ideal one. This isn't super important because it is only 5% crit chance increase, but it is pretty helpful. There's a few others you can get, I'll make a list of them. But after our buffing sequence, we walk through and we instantly want to throw our Weakening Grenade. So as we enter in and we throw our Weakening Grenade to get 10% extra damage, we want to run up to her because otherwise she's going to do a burrowing attack. Basically just a reset if she ever decides to do it. So after throwing the grenade, we want to run up to her and then do a couple things fairly quickly. We want to activate Nebula's mod just to get a bunch of extra damage, and then we want to throw the Alchemist vial at our feet just so we can get our increased attack speed, and then shoot Nebula to get proc Corrosive to get more damage and Bleeding for a bit of extra damage, as well as getting Abrasive Amulet online. What is important to note here is that we actually can do things too quickly and damage her too fast. And what will happen then is she will escape if we do too much damage too quickly. And summon the tentacles, and we want to kill her in one cycle before the tentacles come up. So we actually have to hold off on our damage, and make sure that we're above the threshold. And then the moment she starts a combo attack, then we do all of this, which is why we do like some of this buffing and setup sequence right next to her before doing a ton of damage. So we're just going to run around the back, shoot her, and then just start our charged attack. And then here she starts a combo, which is beautiful, which means I can just keep going and I got my timing on everything right. So she should be trying to escape, and we should just be able to outdamage her before she gets her escape off. Now this was a really fun build to make with a really unique weapon mechanic on it, and I hope you enjoyed this type of video because I'm definitely going to be making more.